Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Wednesday, June 11th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 553 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate all of those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms. And today we've got New York Jets mandatory minicamp day number 2 to recap. We will give you our biggest takeaways from what took place on the field, out at practice at One Jets Drive in Florham Park. And then we'll take a look at some comments made by both coordinators. Steve Wilks and Tanner Engstrand met the media. Justin Fields spoke after practice today. Breece Hall as well. So we'll dive into some comments from the podium as well. As always, though, before we begin, we've got to tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS, America's favorite online sportsbook. If you want to get in on any of the sports betting action, check out BetUS and use my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek. If you want any of the hottest tickets in sports or entertainment, check out SeatGeek and use code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase and get yourself out to some awesome events. Summer is here. Concerts, MLB, anything. Check out SeatGeek, Bubs on Sports, $20 off. And of course, our friends over at Huga House. If you want any of their awesome selection of hats, sweatshirts, and t-shirts, check out Huga House and use code BUBS for 15% off any purchase and get yourself some awesome Huga House swag. So here we go, episode 553. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Appreciate the support, as always, here on the podcast. It is a Wednesday program, and the New York Jets completed day number 2 of mandatory minicamp. They will wrap up their offseason workouts with day number 3 of mandatory minicamp tomorrow, and then it's off, and it's your break until late July when training camp starts. And then after that, once that begins, we'll really be hitting the ground running as we approach the season there shortly after that. So day number 2 of mandatory minicamp, as we did yesterday here, we'll start with what took place on the field. Then we'll get to some comments and head to the podium a little bit later on as well. From a Justin Fields offensive perspective, I would say overall it was another solid day for the New York Jets offense. There were certainly a couple of bumps. There was certainly a couple of, I would say, hiccups. Certainly there was a couple plays from Justin Fields that were really good. A couple drives that went really well. Touchdown pass from Fields, but there was also, of course, a couple moments where Fields had a few misses, few drives stalled, and the offense wasn't quite clicking, which is expected this time of year. And I think that's kind of been the theme. There's been some good. It's been a mixed bag. I thought overall, though, these last 2 days, it feels like there's been a lot more good. And the good really is when it comes to Justin Fields and the Garrett Wilson connection, because yesterday the two were hitting on all cylinders, multiple impressive plays, impressive connections from Fields to Garrett Wilson. And in the same story today, the biggest highlights from practice yesterday and today, and arguably some of the bigger highlights of the offseason so far, OTAs and minicamp included, has been Fields connecting with his former college team at Ohio State, Garrett Wilson. The two look like they have not spent any time away. in a way. It feels like they are picking up right where they left off. A couple of the highlights today from a Fields and Garrett Wilson perspective. It was a 40-yard reception by Garrett Wilson. That was against Brandon Stevens. So second day in a row here where Garrett had his way with Brandon Stevens. That was down the sideline, similar to the play yesterday that we saw. In total, the duo had 3 receptions. Fields today had 6 receptions total. So 3 of those coming from Garrett Wilson. And after that Garrett Wilson play, the ball was down at about the 5-ish, 6-ish yard line, about the 5-yard line, maybe even inside the 5, around there. And the next play, Justin Fields connected with Josh Reynolds on that drive for a touchdown. And that was against Andre Cisco. Very nice throw, tight window throw for Fields. Good to see that they connected there in the red zone. Good to see Josh Reynolds and Fields have a connection there, make a play there. We saw Fields and Reynolds yesterday connect across the middle again today, this time for a touchdown. So last couple practices here, as I always say, it is June. As Glenn says, they're in underwear. So no, I'm not going to sit here and say that Garrett Wilson and Josh Reynolds is going to be the greatest number 2 that the Jets could have next to Garrett Wilson. No, I'm not saying that. But it's good to see Josh Reynolds and Fields connecting here in minicamp and even a couple times throughout OTAs the last 2 days most recently. It's good to see that because you need somebody else to step up. You want to see some positives. You want to see some production, especially once we hit training camp, where you really evaluate these things from a wide receiver perspective behind Garrett Wilson. And you've seen that here with Josh Reynolds. So those were the main highlights. Overall, Fields on the day, 6 of 10 with that touchdown to Josh Reynolds. The highlights plays, the big plays are to Garrett Wilson. And I thought this was interesting. Garrett so far, Fields, I should say this first. Fields so far, 12 of 21 over the last 2 days with the 1 touchdown to Josh Reynolds. Okay. Out of those 21 attempts and 12 receptions, 10 passes have gone to Garrett Wilson, and 7 of those were caught. So 7 of the 12 passes thrown by Justin Fields have gone or have been caught by Garrett Wilson. And I think that just shows where they are right now in terms of they are picking up really in many ways up to this point where they left off. Fields and Garrett, when Fields has looked his way, has been very successful this offseason. And hopefully that carries into the summer. And most importantly, hopefully that's something we see a lot of during the regular season, because that's what matters most. Not just these practices, but when you actually get out there in the games. So those are the main takeaways from Justin Fields, Garrett, the starting offense, that type of stuff. I'll also just say this, and Connor Hughes actually reported on this, and I do think this was an interesting note before I get into some of our other practice notes. The New York Jets and Aaron Glenn have ran practices much differently this offseason and even, these last 2 days of minicamp. In terms of there's a lot more 11 on 11. It's not a ton of 7 on 7. It's not a ton of that scripted plays where even if, let's say, Fields hits Garrett Wilson for a 30-yard reception, the ball's coming back anyway, and you're just running plays, just getting reps, simulating. That's not really what it's been. It's a lot of scrimmage. It's a lot of actually like going up and down the field. Even today, they did their 2-minute drill. You're seeing a lot more than that. And I think that kind of ties into the whole Glenn and this coaching staff approach of preaching competition, where even though it's only June, you're seeing a lot more of actually 11 on 11 team drill stuff where it's really a scrimmage, first team offense, first team defense, and you're moving down the field, right? Third down situations. You even saw today one of the Jets offensive drives stalled. And as a result, the punt team actually came out. You don't usually see that in practice. So definitely something that's different. And as I continue to say here, none of this ultimately matters until they start actually winning games. We need to see wins, right? That's all that matters. But there was a lot of times, just from my perspective, and I think a lot of other Jet fans agree, where you would go to and this isn't training camp, of course, but you would go to like a training camp practice under the Robert Saleh regime, and you would walk away from practice and kind of wonder what they actually just did. Like there was so many practices under Saleh, and even just previous regimes as well, even just going back to Gaze, but just thinking more recently here under Saleh, where I'm in attendance and I'm watching, and you kind of walk away like, what did I just watch? It wasn't a whole lot of action. There wasn't a whole lot of real practicing. It was a lot more of positional drills, kind of standing around, not much energy, just kind of flat. And I think that's a much different vibe than what we're going to get out of Glenn once, especially training camp begins. And it feels like what we've gotten here, which is a lot more of, hey, this is kind of a scrimmage type feel to it, which I think is a good thing. And hopefully that's something that impacts the Jets in a positive way where they're not, because I do think at times why the Jets maybe were so soft is they kind of were just like that, like training camp practices, even just going back to Saleh. There wasn't a whole lot of going on. Is kind of bland and right. I think this is going to preach a little bit more, hopefully physicality, play a little bit more energy, a little bit more urgency. So something that I just wanted to note because I thought that was interesting from Connor Hughes, who's been covering these practices there at One Jets Drive. Now, some other practice notes I wanted to get into. Some defensive stuff. Good day for Jamian Sherwood. He had a sack. Michael Clemens also had a sack. So you do have a Michael Clemens sighting there. Will McDonald had a very good day against Armand Membu. So that's back-to-back strong days for McDonald, who had a good day yesterday. Really excited for what Will McDonald can do this season. I think also just putting on some size, being in this defense, hopefully seeing him really mold himself into a better run stopper as well, I think could go a long way for this defense. Kiko Maui-Noah also had a sack, so the rookie getting involved. And then just some other offensive notes. Two receivers that have kind of been deep on the depth chart. Brandon Smith had a nice play today across the middle, contested catch, and Jamal Pritchett actually had a touchdown, long touchdown from Adrian Martinez, who is of course, Pritchett, a UDFA out of South Alabama. So two guys that have a long way to go for making the roster, but made some plays. So digging a little deeper on the depth chart there. AZ Thomas also had an interception today against Tyrod. So what I think continues from an AZ Thomas perspective, a very, very strong offseason up to this point for the rookie. Hopefully that carries into training camp and, of course, the season itself. So those are the main takeaways from practice, what actually took place today on the field. Now, you get into some of the comments made here. I want to break down both coordinators. Steve Wilks, Tanner Engstrand spoke to the media. We also got some comments from Justin Fields, and Breece Hall spoke as well. I want to start here with Steve Wilks. I'm going to play two clips back to back here. First part of the clip will be Wilks on the defensive identity, and the second part will be his thoughts on the rookies and the competition and their competitive mindset. Here's Wilks.
Our identity of our defense is not how physical our front seven is. Everybody thinks that, the identity of our physical yard is on the back end with our corners and our safety stepping up and those guys compete. You saw one with AZ, I think last week, 2 weeks ago with Garrett, on the sideline in the end zone, knocking the ball down. So those guys are very competitive and they fit our DNA.
I think this second clip there really is something that I wanted to talk about just on the whole. And I think the second clip also kind of ties into the first clip in terms of the defensive identity and the physicality. And I know the secondary stuff as well, but more so just on the rookies and the whole competition. I touched on this earlier in the episode here where you're seeing that competition with the whole scrimmage type of practice where they're able to get a look at all these guys, get all these guys opportunities, get them, a lot of reps. And I just think the rookies in general, I think the Jets are preaching that competition in terms of with the rookies in general, where there's a couple guys here, in my opinion, that have a legitimate shot to play roles on this team this year, not just named Armand Membu and Mason Taylor. We know both those guys are going to start, but you look at a guy like an AZ Thomas. While you look at the depth chart right now and you say to yourself, okay, Brandon Stevens is ahead of him. Of course, you have Sauce and MC too. But I think there's a chance where we do get AZ Thomas starting at some point this year. I even look at a guy like a Malachi Moore, which I really love that pick. That was by far my favorite pick in day number 3 out of Alabama. No guarantee Tony Adams is starting right away. And I don't think there's any guarantee that Tony Adams will start all season, right? There's still a chance that the Jets maybe bring in another safety here with some of these guys still available. I don't think they will, but who knows? Either way, Malachi Moore, somebody who could fight himself into a starting role. Who knows what happens with Arian Smith? So I just think that whole competitive mindset from the rookies, it's something definitely to look for even as we head into training camp here. Just that mindset that those guys have, what Glenn has preached, competition, competition, competition. He has said it time in and time out. Wilkes and Engstrand have spoke on it as well, especially Wilkes from a defensive perspective. I just think it'll be interesting to watch and something to certainly watch for with the way this rest of this roster plays out. A couple of these rookies, we know Mason Taylor and Armand Membu will play big roles for this team, but look out for a guy like an AZ Thomas, who's put together, in my opinion, a very strong offseason. A Malachi Moore as well. They really like Arian Smith. I'm not as high on him. You guys know where I stand, but can he be a guy that, as the season goes on, potentially develops and plays a bigger role than many of us thought? It's certainly something to watch. I also wanted to get this one other clip in here from Wilkes before we move on to Engstrand, and that is Steve Wilkes on Sauce and just what he brings. What's the next step for Sauce Gardner?
It's so many things that I feel like Sauce can do. Again, the word consistent. He's been a Pro Bowl player. How consistent can he be to take it to another level? And that's one of the things that I challenged him day one when we had our conversation. I felt like, and you guys feel the same way, that he's one of the top corners in the league. But, that consistency of being that dominant player each and every week, that's what we're looking for. And that's been his challenge this offseason. He's very gifted, and I told him sometimes your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. He's a guy that sometimes at 85% is still better than everybody around him. So his thing is, and I tell him, compete against yourself. And that's where he has to get better, which he will.
I'm excited to see what Sauce can do with this new coaching staff. I think Sauce is a guy that has been, of course, even despite a down year last year, the 2 All-Pro seasons to start his career, I really think out of all these players on this roster, and I even think Garrett Wilson, who I'll actually get to here in a second, just about in terms of like, if you had a rank, and I might actually do an episode on this, ranking players who could benefit most from this coaching staff, Sauce has got to be near the top. Just in terms of some of the areas of his game, specifically like the lack of interceptions and things like that, areas of his game that I think Wilkes and Glenn can get even more out of him. I think Glenn, especially with the interceptions, and I just think too, in terms of the scheme and what they're going to do, playing a lot more man, playing a lot more press, things that Sauce is very, very good at, that the previous regime didn't do all the time or didn't do it enough at times. And I just think what Glenn and Wilkes are about, especially from Glenn's perspective, former player, corner, had experience and had success, I should say, in terms of more of a ball hawking ability, which is something that Sauce does need to improve on a bit. You'd like to see the interceptions aren't the end all be all, but you'd like to see him be able to grab a couple more interceptions. Just his defense in general, force some more turnovers. That's always kind of been the knock on this defense, is sometimes their lack of turnovers and the amount that they were able to force. Like Sauce is a guy that I think could do more of that this year. So if there was a ranking, Sauce, in my opinion, would be near the top of that in terms of benefiting the most from this coaching staff. So that was Wilkes. Couple of my biggest takeaways there. On to Tanner Engstrand. We've heard Glenn talk about this a lot, but Engstrand also spoke about it. Fields taking over a leadership role and the quiet confidence that he brings.
Absolutely, and I think AG touched on this a little bit the other day. Just kind of a quiet confidence about him. A little lead by example. But if you could be in the huddle, there's some command there, and when he's talking, the guys listen. And I think that's part of the best part about it is he doesn't have to be overly vocal or outlandish and over the top with his communication with guys. It's just really an example, lead by example. And when something needs to be said, he'll say it and they'll listen.
It's been the common phrase used, quiet confidence. Glenn, I think, first said it back at the owners' meetings and has continued to say it. Engstrand now saying it as well. Fields will even mention it here in a couple minutes when we get to what he had to say. Clearly taking over a leadership role. And I think the whole quiet confidence thing comes from, you look at Fields and he's not someone that's overly loud or obnoxious, but, quietly will go about his business, lead by example. And hopefully the biggest thing with Fields is, have some success here, right? Also, Engstrand spoke on Garrett Wilson, and I want to get into Garrett and some of what he can do in this offense. But first, here's Engstrand.
How much have you enjoyed watching Garrett Wilson practice? Because he practices with intensity, but he also is making some pretty close catches out there, too.
Yeah, and Garrett is he's continuing to improve every single day and learn the way that we want to run the routes all the time without taking his creativity away, just him learning when he needs to be in certain places at certain times, because that's where the quarterback expects him to be. But yeah, he's making some catches now. He had one the other day. He had one last week. Clearly an elite athlete, and we're looking forward to him continuing to get a hold and a grasp of this offense and take it to the next level.
So that's Engstrand on Garrett. We know Garrett, right, has had a couple really good days here, and overall has had a very solid spring for this Jets team. And that shouldn't come by a surprise, right? This guy's a stud. But I just think, and Engstrand kind of talked about it there a little bit with the creativity. I know he was talking more about just him as a receiver, but just in general. Now, we just got done talking about Sauce and how the coaching staff can benefit from him. Garrett is a guy that just, there were so many times where things were so difficult for him, and the offense that the Jets have had the last 3 years, especially under Hackett, was so difficult for him to make plays. Like, there was so many plays, so many times. Almost all of Garrett Wilson's catches were never easy. There was never scheming him open. There was never even using him in creativity packages and kind of thinking outside the box. There was none of that with Garrett. Everything for Garrett Wilson has always been so difficult, has always been so hard. And it's been this coaching staff and the incompetence at offensive coordinator not being able to scheme him open and get him easy passes, get him easy receptions and things like that. Even just drive starters, you didn't see much of that, where you get him the ball quickly out in space and let him find a way to pick up 5 or 6 on a first down. So you put yourself into a 2nd and 4, and that's a good start to a drive, right? None of that. And I just think with Engstrand, and even just you go back and watch the Lions offense, and I think this fits for everybody on this offense, but how many times there was just guys in Detroit running open, freely running open, just scheming guys open, right? Simple plays, nothing crazy, no double end around, none of that. Yeah, certainly the creativity, but just simple plays of scheming him open and finding a hole in the defense and getting Garrett in that hole and giving him easy passes. Nothing has really come easy for Garrett. He's made a ton of really difficult plays. And we actually talked about this a couple weeks ago when an ESPN analyst made a bold prediction that Garrett Wilson, I think it was lead the league in receiving yards, which I don't see it happening. I think that's crazy. I would love that. I just don't see that. But one of the biggest reasons was the ability for Engstrand to scheme him open and get him some more easier receptions and things like that. And I just think hearing him speak there, like that's just something that, right, talk about Sauce benefiting a ton. Garrett's another guy, in my opinion, that can benefit a ton. And hope for this entire offense, really. Engstrand also commented on Fields, talked about his work ethic, called him workaholic. So something else to note there. Now on to Fields himself. Here was Fields on taking over a leadership role.
It's been good. It's been good for sure. Kind of had a feeling when I got here, guys were looking for, a leader to step up on offense. So, I was glad to, receive that role. And, of course, been, pushing the guys each and every day to be our best and play up to our standard.
It's been the common theme, Fields taking over a leadership role. Fields also spoke on his former college teammate, Garrett Wilson, and how they feel they picked up where they left off.
Has the connection with Garrett Wilson almost been like riding a bike now that you guys are back together?
Yeah, basically. Like I said, I don't think we really missed a beat. So, Garrett's been great. Really, all the receivers, tight ends, and running backs have been great. So, but yeah, like you said, really haven't missed a beat.
So that was Fields on Garrett. Those are the first two clips. This next clip, I think, is really, really interesting. And this also kind of ties into Breece, who I also thought made some interesting comments today. But this was Fields on Breece Hall.
Yeah, Breece is a ball player for sure. Of course, everybody knows he can run, but what kind of surprised me is his natural hands when I first, started throwing with him. I mean, he has natural hands, kind of like a receiver, and he's really just all around back. So, definitely glad to have him on my team for sure.
We got some good Breece talking points today. Right there from Fields, just got talked about his ability as a pass catcher, something that has been very underutilized from Breece Hall. And I think that's important because Breece also spoke to the media about that. Now, one other note on Fields, he did also say that he plans on meeting with wide receivers and tight ends, or at least planning something with them before training camp. You oftentimes see guys do this. Fields looks like will do the same. But it's interesting to note because Breece also spoke to the media today and in a way kind of feels like took a shot at Hackett and the previous offense. But Fields talking about Breece there and his ability as a passer. I also think this was an interesting quote that I want to dive into from Breece about just Engstrand, the offense, and his role.
I know Tanner loves to run the ball. So for me, just getting ready for that. But he also knows how I can be effective in the pass game. And, him and AG always tell me, Breece, you're gonna do everything. So for me, it's getting ready just to do everything. It's like this. It's not such a different approach to being in one offense or the other offense. For me, I have to be ready to, be a 3-down back and be a threat to do everything. So I feel like it's not really a different approach I have to take.
Really, a lot of stuff, I should say. Really interesting comments there, and a lot of stuff to take away. Right, talking about how he can do everything. That's an important factor. Because even when you look at this Jets offense this year and you kind of tie it back into the Fields angle and the receiving aspect from Breece, something the Jets underutilized a ton the last 2 years, especially last year, where you actually had Rodgers healthy. You were hoping that they could get Breece Hall involved in a bigger role as a receiving back, out of the backfield as a pass catcher. But they couldn't do that. And even in 2023, they couldn't do that. We go back to Nathaniel Hackett comments all the time when he said he didn't realize he was much of a factor in the pass game until that Giants game. He waited that long to realize that. Terrible. Straight up incompetence. And I think when you look at this Jets team this year, there's a good chance that the way that you can kind of counteract some of the questions at wide receiver is you look at the potential for the Jets target share. You're probably looking at Garrett definitely being number one, but then Breece and Mason Taylor, you're probably not looking at your wide receiver two. He's probably more so your fourth most targeted or fourth most receptions on the team. And that's a big deal if you can get Breece more involved as a passer or as a receiver. And I think you look at the way Jahmyr Gibbs was utilized in Detroit. I think you look at that, Tanner Engstrand, the connection, and you hope that you can get that out of Breece. And I think Breece kind of took a little bit of a shot there silently, but also just saying how Tanner Engstrand, he knows he's going to run the ball. He knows this offense is going to run the ball. They're going to be a run-first offense. How many times last year did the Jets just completely forget about the run? And Brees did talk about the knee injury, how it was a lot more severe than I think many thought and potentially slowed him down. Brees did not have a very good year last year. No denying that. I think a lot of that, though, was there was just never any rhythm, and he was not used nearly enough. It was pathetic, especially late in the season. We say this all the time. It was the Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams show. That's what it was. This is going to be a run-first team with an identity. It's going to be led by Brees Hall. Brees also spoke on Justin Fields.
That's been good. He's real cool, calm, and collected, and brings another sense of calm to the offense. And just seeing how he works and how diligent he is, and how he cares. He's trying to gain relationships with everybody, and how he goes about his business. It's been fun so far. He gets hype like everybody else. He's young like us, so we talk about a lot of the same stuff. We can hang out on the weekends, and it's just been cool to be around. He's a good dude.
So the RB1, QB1 relationship there, of course, building. Brees also mentioned, kind of addressed some of the trade rumors, said that Glenn called him after the draft to tell him, they're not trading him. They have no interest in trading him, and tell him that he was the running back. And to be honest, I just think the whole Brees Hall trade stuff, I think, has gotten so far out of control this offseason. I've said that so much. I never bought into the Jets trading Brees for a second. I never bought into it actually happening, and I never bought into the idea that they should actually do it. I never agreed with it either. And I think it all goes back to Glenn's comments at the owners' meetings, which I think were completely thrown out of context in terms of when he was saying how, the Jets have, they're going to use all their running backs, and they're going to, share the wealth. And I think people saw that and said, yep, they're going to trade him, or they don't believe in Brees. No, that's not what it was. It's more so you're going to get Braylon Allen more involved, even Isaiah Davis to a certain extent, but more so Braylon Allen more involved, and you're going to have more of that 1-2 punch. Brees Hall is not going to get carries taken away. They're going to run the ball significantly more than they had last year. You're going to see, and I've said this so many times, more of that. Hopefully what you saw to Gibbs and Montgomery, maybe not to that level, but that type of run share where Brees is still getting the majority of the carries, but you're going to see a lot more carries from Braylon Allen. You're going to see them use Braylon Allen a lot more, which they should. There were so many times last year where they didn't use Braylon Allen enough as your short yardage back. Brees still your do-it-all guy, right? Gibbs had a lower percentage of carries for the Lions last year than Brees did for the Jets, but Gibbs still finished with more carries near the top of the league, a monster season. When you run the ball a lot more, you're going to get more carries, of course. You're also going to spread the wealth. Braylon Allen's going to be more of a number two because it can't just be a one-man show. That's what you saw in Detroit. I've said that so many times. I think it's all gone blown out of context. So Brees is still going to play a big role, and I understand he had a rough year last year, and I understand that there was a couple really bad games where he was just a complete non-factor, but I continue to just go back. That offense was horrible. The coaching was horrible. They didn't put him in any position to succeed. It was all boring, vanilla run plays when everybody was expecting it, not using him nearly enough in the passing game. That should change this year, and it needs to change this year, and hopefully it does, and I think it will. And those comments, I think, reflect on the early stages of what this offense is doing and can do, with Brees Hall fully in the mix. So that's day number 2 of minicamp. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts, your biggest takeaways from practice today? We will be back tomorrow recapping the third and final day. Glenn will speak to the media again, so we'll, of course, discuss that. And, of course, break down everything that took place on the field. And after tomorrow, the wait is on. About 40 days break, and then come back, and it's training camp, and it's full steam ahead. So off season, flying by. We're almost there. First, though, one more day of minicamp tomorrow, and we'll be back here recapping it all. So stay tuned. Appreciate the support. Until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.